Hello and welcome to the Evolution Podcast. My name is Benjamin Ehrman and I am currently a junior biology major at Hiram College. Today is a beautifully frigid December day, and as I took a walk on a forested trail at our field station this morning, I couldn't help but to think how quiet and still it was. Snow covered the ground, and the only noises were my own 2 feet trudging through the snow and the occasional creaking of a tree. It was a peaceful and relaxing morning, but I couldn't help but to wish there were more birds and other animals scurrying about the forest, perhaps even playing in the snow. Alas, it may not be the best time of year for the forest to be booming with life, since a lot of species have migrated south or are hibernating for the winter. But as I stood there, I couldn't help to think of the future. A future where, regardless of the season, all biological life, including the animals, the trees, and all other plants, wouldn't be there. You may ask, how could this happen? Well, thanks to all the hard work mankind has put into industrializing and colonizing the natural world, this could become a reality due to climate change. You see, humans for so long have pumped carbon dioxide, methane, chlorofluorocarbons, nitrous oxide, etc. into the atmosphere that now it's finally catching up to us. Acid rain falls all across the planet. Temperatures rise at unprecedented rates, and life on Earth can't keep up with all these changes. Metaphorically, life on Earth is in a boxing match against climate change, but climate change has hidden brass knuckles underneath its gloves. Climate change may have the upper hand on most species, but not all of them will succumb to its mighty right hook. As you know, evolution is a very, very, very long process, and a mere few centuries isn't enough time for most species to adapt to the changes us humans have created. Although, not all hope is lost. Scientists are always discovering new species, some of which live in some of the most inhospitable places in the world. Regardless of climate change, life will go on. It will continue to evolve, but life on Earth may look much different than what we've come to know. In this episode, I'll be talking about the evolution of species in regards to climate change. To be more specific, throughout the episode, I'll discuss climate change and its implications on the natural world, and then with that in mind, we'll look to see what organisms have already adapted to withstand harsh conditions, and to see which other organisms may have the best chance at surviving in this unforeseen climate without the use of human modification. But before I get into all of that, let me first discuss climate change. If you don't know what climate change is, then man, you need to come out from under your rock. You can inadvertently notice it all around you. Maybe you've heard from others or even thought of yourself, wow, this has been a really hot summer. Or, there wasn't as much snow this winter as last year. Or even, these tropical storms keep getting worse and worse. Hell, I'm barely even considered an adult and I recognize all of these examples. But nonetheless, I don't mean to shame. I'm here to help educate you. If you don't understand climate change, don't fret. I'll lay it all out before you. So please put on your listening ears and hear me out. In essence, climate change is global warming due to the human emissions of greenhouse gases and the resulting large-scale shift in weather patterns. Climate change is helped by the greenhouse effect, which is the warming that occurs when the atmosphere traps heat-radiating gases which are released from the Earth and thus prevents heat from escaping into space. Specific gases in the atmosphere that prevent heat from escaping the Earth are called greenhouse gases. Some of the more well-known greenhouse gases are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and CFCs, which stand for chlorofluorocarbons. Water vapor is the most abundant greenhouse gas, but it also serves as an important feedback loop to the climate. As the Earth warms, more water vapor is put into the atmosphere, and this increases the possibility of clouds, which under certain conditions can reflect heat. Also, the presence of water vapor increases precipitation, which is important for all life on Earth. Although, due to the other gases released into the atmosphere, the rain can become acidic and thus falling upon plants weakens them and makes them more susceptible to disease. Carbon dioxide is released through natural processes such as our own respiration and that of other animals and volcanic eruptions. But it is mainly released through human activities such as deforestation, changes in land use, and burning fossil fuels. Mankind has contributed to a 47% increase in atmospheric carbon since the Industrial Revolution. This is an astonishing feat and not one that we should be proud of. Methane can be produced through natural processes through the decomposition of waste, but it is also produced a lot by humans. Through our sitting of waste in landfills, agriculture techniques, and management of domestic livestock, we greatly increase methane concentrations in the atmosphere. Next is nitrous oxide, which is produced through our soil cultivation practices such as the use of commercial and organic fertilizers. It can also be produced through fossil fuel combustion, nitric acid production, and biomass burning. CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons. They are completely synthetic compounds of an entirely unnatural origin. They were used in several appliances such as air conditioners and refrigerators before 1995. They contribute to the destruction of the ozone layer, but now we thankfully have an international agreement for the regulation and the production and release of these compounds. This doesn't mean that they all magically disappeared though, but at least they are greatly reduced. It's difficult to predict exactly what will happen due to the increase in greenhouse gases, but it is causing climate change all around us. On average, the Earth will become warmer. Some regions will have warmer temperatures, whereas others will not. Warmer temperatures will increase evaporation and overall increase precipitation, but some regions will have more rain, where others will have much less. Higher temperatures will melt the glaciers and rise the sea level, which will be very bad for anyone living on or near the coasts. Climate extremes such as droughts, floods, fires, and heavy storms will become more common, which will wreak havoc on any living organism at the brunt of that. Overall, climate change is a very real thing that has thousands of scientists, facts, and research backing it up. It's definitely worth looking into yourself. The warming of the Earth and the incidental shift in weather patterns is, in my opinion, impossible to stop at this point. But that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do about it. We can prevent any further harm to the environment, and with that, we would have to totally rethink the ways we live our lives. We would have to give up and reduce the use of many of the things we've grown comfortable with and practice more sustainable techniques. I could spend this whole podcast talking about what we should be doing to prevent further harm to the environment, but we'll have to leave that for a later episode. So far, I believe I've paved a solid foundation for climate change, and now we can move on to the main topic of today, evolution in regards to climate change. When you think of evolution, what do you think of? Most people might think of apes turning into humans, which isn't technically true. I mean, us humans share a common ancestor with modern day apes, but they aren't our direct ancestors, more like distant hairy cousins. You might also think of dinosaurs and how their descendants are now modern day birds. How can such giant creatures that once dominated the world become this little flying creature that annoyingly wakes me up in the morning with its tweets and squawks? Well, through the natural selection of a huge meteor and, of course, evolution. As you know, as I've said before, evolution is a very, very, very slow process that takes millions and millions of years. It doesn't breed perfection, and we can see that when we look at the vestigial structures or organs of certain species. Evolution only gives species the tools they need to survive at that given time. You may have a spoon to dig a hole, but hey, you're still able to dig that hole. Since evolution takes so long for you to see huge morphological changes, that doesn't mean it's not happening around you every day. Cells are constantly dividing, and DNA is always being transcribed, and with it mutations occur. Small changes can be made without you even noticing it, and with that, you could become more adapted to your environment. Only time will tell if these mutations will make you more adaptable to survive, or less adapted to survive, or if they have no effect on you at all. Although, climate change has greatly increased the rate at which individuals need to adapt. Their environments are changing faster than what evolution is used to, and as you should know, natural selection takes no prisoners. It has no preference for who it takes. Individuals who are unfit don't pass on their genes, and they no longer contribute to the gene pool. Sadly, it's not evolution's fault for being so slow. It's all our fault that we've impacted the world this way. In this era of human-caused extinction, we have severely altered the atmosphere, destroyed habitat, killed off species for our own food, and even introduced invasive species that do the dirty work for us. Many species have no way of protecting themselves from what us humans have done, and it is unprecedented in evolutionary history that one evolution's creations is taking down so many others with it. This doesn't mean every species is helpless, though. Many are already racing to adapt to what's happening all around them. Even when ecosystems are presented with certain biological stresses, they change. An example of this would be the shifting of plant communities when water movement is altered in riparian areas. In an experiment looking at riparian areas of temperate Europe, Battrup, Peterson et al. Conducted an experiment that induced drought and flood conditions to look at the resulting change in plant communities. They found that taxonomic diversity initially declined for both conditions, but eventually, under the drought conditions, biodiversity stabilized, whereas under flooded conditions, declines in biodiversity continued. They found that flooding imposed a more severe stress, which is to me quite surprising. Who would have known that having too much water for these plants is worse than having little to none at all? They found in their study that certain morphological traits help to make plants in each scenario more suitable to their conditions. And if you're a plant species that didn't have these traits, you're eventually weaned out. Drought and flooding conditions can serve as a huge threat to plant biodiversity and can thus have cascading effects on the rest of the environment. Those plants that do survive carry on their traits and pass them on to their offspring, and that makes them more adapted to their environment. They change with the environment and have to evolve to survive in it. Continuing on, endemic species are potentially most at risk of a changing environment. These are species that are restricted to specific areas, such as islands or high up in mountaintops. An example of this comes from a paper from Kostian et al. In 2015, where they looked at 19 endemic plant species from the tropical mountaintops of northeast Queensland, Australia. They predicted that the suitable niche space for these species was going to rapidly decrease by 2040. These suitable niches are predicted to decline by a minimum of 17%, whereas the maximum is 100%. By 2080, suitable niches for these plant species are predicted to have a minimum decline of 46%. This loss of space is significant, and it will lead to more competition amongst these plant species. Eventually, some of them will be outcompeted and thus no longer exist. You may wonder why these plants don't go somewhere more suitable and spread out. Well, plants, as you know, don't have limbs that can carry them wherever they go. But also, not every plant species is equipped with very good dispersal techniques. Some plants rely on other organisms or abiotic occurrences, such as the wind, to carry away their seeds. Plants that do have a good dispersal potential, such as the 3 of the 19 endemic plant species discussed in the previously mentioned paper, will have a difficult time outcompeting other species that have already established themselves. This problem gets even more exacerbated when you think of all the invasive plant species that already have a good history of outcompeting native adversaries. Endemic species have especially evolved to thrive in a specific niche, and if their environment changes too fast, they aren't able to adapt. As I've mentioned before, species are able to adapt into a specific niche over long amounts of evolutionary time, but the rates at which climate change is occurring, it is impossible for many species to be able to do so. We see these trends not only in plants but in vertebrates as well. In a fascinatingly depressing article by Ignacio Quintero and John J. Wines, together they discovered that climate change is happening too quickly for climatic niche evolution to occur among vertebrate species. They found that to match the rate of climate change, vertebrates would have to evolve 10,000 times faster than rates typically observed. That is just crazy. There is no fast track for evolution. It can't just speed up like that when it wants to. So far, we have already seen several range contractions in species, and in our lifetime, we'll observe even more species going extinct because of having no suitable place to live. Besides this, there is always hope. Hope that not everything will die. I find it very unlikely for all biological life to cease to exist. Whether that life is only microbial, life will go on and continue to evolve. Those species that do survive and adapt to climate change will continue to evolve, and with that, new species will emerge that will once again cover the earth. Speaking of species that cover the Earth, would you think that species that lived across a larger area would be more adaptable to climate change? After all, these species might have more variability in the environments that they could survive in. Surprisingly, this may not be the case. In an article by K.E. Atkins and J.M.J. Travis, they looked into local adaptations and the evolution of species ranges under climate change. Their research targeted sessile organisms. These are ones that are fixed in one place throughout their lives. They questioned if having a broader range would make them more robust to climate change, and they found that species with broader ranges could be even more susceptible to extinction. This is due to locally adapted genotypes that are blocked from range shifting due to the presence of cooler adapted genotypes. These cooler adapted genotypes could remain in the population even when their optimum climate has long been gone, and this puts the rest of the population at risk. Through their research, we now know that treating a species as one single homogeneous unit could be flawed, and we also can't infer that species that are already expanding their range due to climate change will continue to do so. They may be at risk of collapse. Changing environments pose a huge risk for species, especially since it's happening as fast as it is due to climate change. Evolution works wonders when it has the time to, but sadly time is running out. Through the work of Mazencourt et al., we see that even biodiversity poses a threat to evolution. You see, when an environment is more biodiverse, it increases the chance that one or more species are already pre-adapted to the new conditions. You may think that this is great news, but in a way, it's really not. When this occurs, it restricts the opportunities for all species in that area to evolve. These species that are already pre-adapted will have an easier time outcompeting others, who are not, and this will result in a huge shift in species abundances and in turn push some of them out. Nature is very competitive, and only the fittest survive. Species aren't going to wait for their neighbor to get adaptations that help them to be a proper competitor. They are going to reproduce and take up as much space as they're able to, and if that means their neighbor no longer exists, then so be it. A great example of organisms who have adapted to their surroundings are extremophiles. These organisms are those that have adapted to extreme environments that are uninhabitable for us, as well as several model organisms such as E. coli. Examples of these organisms are Antarctic fish thriving in waters near or below 0 degrees Celsius year-round, sea anemones that burrow into ice to live their lives, and hydrothermal vent microbes that live off of noxious compounds in a high-pressure, high-temperature environment. These organisms have adapted to their environment well, but even they can be at risk due to climate change. Many of the chemical and physiological processes that allow these organisms to thrive are unknown and require more research, but what we do know is a lot of them have help from symbiotic associations. Symbiotic associations may become a key factor in adapting to these unprecedented changes. It even may help to speed up the evolution of organisms if they adopt synergistic tendencies. Cryptogams, or in common terms lichens, bryophytes, and algae, are usually the dominant plant species in extreme terrestrial environments. They are able to survive with high and low water availability and at high and low temperatures. This makes them good candidates to be able to withstand and adapt to climate change. Even some invertebrates have a good chance at surviving in extreme environments. For example, invertebrates that survive at hydrothermal vents have symbiotic associations that help them to survive. Maybe it will become more mainstream to have these associations with chemoautotrophic microbes or other autotrophic microbes that will make species more fit to survive in a world of climate change. Some of the most adaptable organisms are microbes and viruses. They typically multiply quickly, and with that they produce more mutations that can make them more fit for their environments or host. Some viruses even have unique morphologies that likely help to stabilize their DNA under extreme conditions. In my opinion, there's no way climate change will take out these organisms. Microbes and viruses are the founders of life, and I'm sure some heat and gases aren't going to stop them from evolving. Perhaps even microbes will be the reason the Earth returns to a more normal state that allows bigger life to return. Overall, it is hard for us to predict exactly which species will survive and what others will not. Scientists are always creating different models, and even then, climate change is often erratic and it typically goes above and beyond what we predict. I think a good mantra for us environmentalists is the saying that life will go on. 65 million years ago, when the meteor hit Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs, along with the majority of life, the era of mammals emerged and life continued practically unfazed. Life goes on. Us humans can help to reduce the effects of climate change, but as of right now, it doesn't seem likely that all of us will come together to do so. Despite this, there will be species that persevere and live on to evolve despite of anything that we may do. Species will continue to emerge and evolve to adapt to their surroundings despite what climate change does to their environments. Unlike our mantra, though, this podcast must come to an end. I hope you enjoyed listening, and may I leave you with our mantra: life will go on.